I'm going to show you how to make a beginner-friendly, stunning 5-tier dummy wedding cake. It was the most affordable DIY option for my wedding. You could also do this for quinceañeras, birthdays, or any other special occasion cake. It's super inexpensive and the best option if you want a big, multi-layered cake but don't have the budget for it. Hi dolls! Welcome back to Lisanna Does Things. I'm so happy you're here. So let's begin with my inspiration. I wanted my wedding theme to be royal glam and the cake had to look elegant with lots of florals and regal designs. So here are screenshots I have of my inspo. When I reached out to bakeries, they were either really intimidated by my idea and declined my order, or the cost was going to be over $2,000, which I thought was silly for a cake. So I looked at other options and looked at faux cakes on Etsy, and the vendors were either already booked for my wedding date or were too expensive for my taste for just a simple cake. No pun intended. So I looked into other options and I did the math and I found out that it was more cheaper to do it by myself, and I did a ton of research online and I learned from a lot of YouTube videos. Anyways, so I wanted to have 2 layers with an acrylic layer full of lights and florals, kind of like these cakes. And it would have saved me some money, you know, if I went to the bakery, and time if I had to do it myself. And then I wanted to have that added elegant height I was looking for. So ideally the 2nd and 4th tier would have that acrylic round base, and the rest would be, you know, real cake or fake cake, whatever. I wanted to copy this exact cake. I wanted the base to be covered in florals, honey, and the draping curtain on the other tiers with like a monogram design with the letter M in the middle. Super sophisticated, but obviously super time consuming. I was inspired by 90s wedding cakes that had that cheesy staircase and the water fountain, so I found this cake stand by Wilton's and found this adorable water fountain that fit inside the cake stand. It was absolutely gorgeous and pretty, and it worked out perfectly. So with that being said, I can't wait to show you how I made my fake 5-tier cake using styrofoam rounds for my wedding and how I decorated, or lack thereof, but there's a mini story time for that later in the video. The cake looked so real and even smells like real fondant. It's super sweet, like your guests would never know. So before we begin, we'll need some materials to get started. I got these items from Walmart and Amazon, and as always, dolls, we don't gatekeep over here. I included the links in the description below. So the materials you need, I'm going to show you 2 ways how to make a fondant covered cake. So for the first way, you're going to need the Wilton brand white fondant. That's the one that I used. Or you're going to need the Wilton brand Pre Rolled Fondant. You're going to need Crisco vegetable shortening, your choice of a styrofoam dummy cake. I had the 5-tier round ones, which were 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 inches wide, and each were 4 inches in height. The Wilton large fondant rolling pin with the guide rings for sizing. Cornstarch for dusting. I also read you can use powdered sugar, but I didn't use that. The Wilton fondant smoother. I think I got this from Walmart. I got 2 of them. They come like in a single package, but you can also use, it's just a piece of plastic. You can also use whatever brand. Cake decorating turntable. This one I already had at home and I used it. It's actually just like decorative. It's not like real. You're gonna need a fondant trimmer or scissors, but if you have like a pizza cutter that's already at home, save your money and use that. A food scale to weigh the fondant, plastic wrap or a large bag or an airtight container to preserve the cake, and an airtight seal once you've already made it. And if you're going to decorate your cake, I didn't touch too much on this and I'll tell you why later on, but if you're going to decorate it, you're going to need water, edible or real glue to stick on your designs, plastic wrap or an airtight container to keep your fondant designs moist enough until you're ready to put them on, a small paintbrush, an icing spatula, rhinestone ribbon, which I used for the bottom base of my cake, and REAL Fondant mold. No other mold will work. First, we're going to prepare our workspace and gather the materials. So make sure you're starting off with a clean and dry work area. I used my granite kitchen countertop because it was smooth and I washed it with soap and water, and then I dried it off. You don't want anything to imprint or get into the fondant because it's so hard to get out and you'll need to start over. So make sure there's like no little crumbs or rice or anything that can get into the fondant that would mess it up. Grab your jar of Crisco vegetable shortening and cover your dummy cake. This helps to fill in the texture of the styrofoam, so when you are ready to cover the cake with the fondant, it's smooth and it adheres nicely. You want to rub it enough so that there's a nice coating on it, but it's not super thick. Make sure you're only covering the sides where the fondant is going to cover, which are the sides and the top. Don't put this on the bottom. For this first tutorial, I experimented with Wilton's Rolled Fondant. So I got my Wilton large rolling pin and the orange ring guide, which is 1/8 of an inch thick, and I placed that at the end of each stick. Then I got my Wilton fondant smoother and a measuring tape. Next, I just gathered all my materials to start, so I grabbed some cornstarch, plastic wrap, and parchment paper. Then I'm gonna put on this rolly thing since I don't have a cake spinny thing, whatever you call it. I just made sure to wipe it down because I'm gonna cover it with the parchment paper on top. That way, when I am draping the cake, it doesn't get stuck onto the actual plate. Once that parchment paper is taped down, you want to add your cake on top and set it to the side so we can start dusting our area with cornstarch. I took the pre-rolled fondant out scared AF out of the package because I don't know what I'm doing or how it's going to turn out, but here we go. It's an adventure. So I just inspected it to make sure it didn't have any bumps. It was a little bit rigid, so I'm just making sure that I'm rolling it out, so I'm smoothing it out, but also because I have to extend it more so I could stretch it out so it could be the right thickness and the right size for the cake. This pre-rolled fondant is ready to use, but I needed to make it a little bit bigger to fit my dummy cake. So the way I calculated the diameter of the cake, or basically how wide I needed to roll out the fondant, is the easiest way to do it is height plus width plus height, and then you add an inch or two. So basically you want to make sure that you just add a couple extra inches so you have enough fondant to drape over the cake, and you could trim it at the bottom. If you roll it exactly out to the width of the cake and you don't add any extra inches, then you accidentally run into the issue where you can lay the edge of the fondant on the cake too close to the bottom edge of the dummy, and you're gonna see the styrofoam, like it won't cover enough. So you want to make sure that you have a little bit extra to work with in case that happens. As you're rolling it out, you want to pick it up and gently flip it over, and then you can go ahead and add a little bit more cornstarch on the side, or maybe even some of the Crisco oil to your hands to kind of make it a little bit easier for you. You want to keep flipping it because if you only stretch one side of it, then it's going to rip. It's going to tear. It won't be able to pull it off of the surface that you're rolling it on, because at the bottom while it's expanding, the cornstarch isn't giving enough to kind of like coat it and make it non-stick. Another way to cover a dummy cake is to use pre-made fondant and knead it out to the size that you need. So for this one, you're gonna need your food weight scale and measuring tape. I've already been working on another dummy cake, so I had some leftover fondant that I was going to use. The Wilton website gives you all the measurements and weights to help you use the right amount of fondant. So for example, if you have a cake that's 6 inches wide and 4 inches tall, you need 18 ounces of fondant. Super easy. I linked it below because nobody got time for math out here. I laid out my measuring tape so it was easier for me to know when to stop rolling out the fondant to the right size. We're going to follow the same step as before and dust the countertop with cornstarch. And don't feel like you're wasting fondant. You can reuse it again. Once you're done with it, just roll it up into a ball, lightly coat it with Crisco. You can also wrap it back up in plastic wrap, and I just put it in a Ziploc bag, but you can do any other airtight container so you can use it again for the future. Because if not, it will dry up and you can't use it. You can't bring it back to life by adding water or none of that. Rub some Crisco on your hands and get ready to kneading. I will admit I had to look up videos on how to knead, and this part really sucks because when you first take out the block, it's hard and you have to use some of that body heat from your hands to make it more malleable. It does get softer the longer you knead it, and think about it, the bigger the cake, the more fondant you need, the more kneading you have to do. So I filmed this back in late October 2021, so the house was a bit on the cooler side. I noticed that on days when it's warmer on the inside of the house, it was easier to knead. As you're kneading, sprinkle some more cornstarch on the countertop or add more Crisco to your hands if you need to. Once you've softened it up and it's pliable, you can flatten the ball and start rolling. Keep rolling until you get to the 1/8 inch thickness or until you reach the width that you need for your cake. I have the tape measure extended so I know when to stop. So for example, if you have a 6 by 4 inch cake, you'll need to roll out the fondant until it's 16 inches wide. You'll know you reached the 1/8 thickness when the orange ring on the roller finally touches the countertop evenly. When I rolled it out, it didn't look right. I must have had not kneaded it correctly, so I saw some lines in between. So I just wanted to go ahead and re-roll it again and start over. You want to use your rolling pin to continue to roll out the edges and use even pressure as you go. Then you want to change directions and flip it over as much as you can just so it's all even. Sprinkle more cornstarch if you have to, but it's going to give you a nice even shape. Just try not to flatten out the edges too much, and if you don't apply even pressure, it's going to give you a wavy texture, which you want to avoid as much as possible. This video actually turned out longer than I expected it to be. I'm editing over like an hour of video. So sometimes the fondant doesn't roll out kind of like how we want it into an even circle, but that's okay, it's okay. I'm a beginner, and before I started working on my wedding cake, I never kneaded dough or decorated a cake, so this video is 1000% beginner friendly, full of tips and tricks. So when you're just kneading it out, just make sure that you have enough area in the middle that has enough of a circle shape that's rolled out so that when you cover the cake, regardless of, you know, if there's a side hanging out that's too long, kind of like where you see right there, that there's enough fondant to cover the cake. And then you can just trim off the excess as you go. It's not even recording. So I thought I was recording when I actually wasn't, so you missed the most important step. My bad, dolls. But I'll show you again what to do. Once you place the cake on the spinny stand, what you'll want to do is carefully pick up the fondant from the countertop and drape the fondant over the rolling pin and then cover the cake with it. You'll want to make sure that the fondant is evenly laid across over the center point of the roller, and then you carefully drape the fondant over the styrofoam dummy. Use the fondant smoother to remove any air bubbles and ensure the most perfect, smoothest finish you've ever seen on a cake. You can also use your hands and fingers to smooth down the top. The fondant smoother is going to help with the fondant to stick to the styrofoam. You don't need to apply lots of pressure, just a gentle circular motion will do the trick. So remember earlier I had dusted a little bit of cornstarch on top of the smoother, so you can use that too to kind of get a nice smooth finish. This is definitely the trickiest part of the process where you want to work quickly before the fondant starts to harden or dry out. The weight of the fondant skirt is pulling the fondant near the rim and causing it to tear. So I'm trying to lift up the skirt and smooth that tear so you can't see it. A lot of the things that can go wrong happen in this stage, so you might have to start over and re-knead the dough or just accept your fate and have blemishes on your cake, which is what I did. You can get something called elephant skin where the fondant is stretched too thin and you can see the texture. When you drape it over your cake, it's in its most delicate state, so you want to work quickly before it hardens up. Now on to the hardest part. To smooth the sides, I would pull up the skirt and rub my hand around the cake to press it in. I continue to do this while spinning the cake around, working my way down to the bottom. Kind of like if you're spiraling around the cake. You want to pull up the skirt and kind of flatten the ruffle towards the base of the side of the cake. I don't know how this works or makes sense, but it does. I'm just using enough pressure to flatten it against the cake because I'm going to continue to lift up the skirt as I go around the cake to smooth it down. I'm gonna speed this part up because it is time consuming and you want this to be perfect, so don't rush, take your time. But definitely, just keep doing the same motions. You're gonna keep repeating the same thing over and over. Lift up the skirt, rub your hand down the sides, lift it up again, all the way until you reach the bottom. Just make sure you're keeping it at even sides, so like one side isn't higher than the other, because then you're gonna have to start over again. You're gonna get texture and layers in the fondant that you can visually see, and you don't want that. As you make your way down towards the bottom, you're going to notice that you're going to have more skirt, more ruffles, so it's going to be a little bit more harder. But don't worry, girl, keep going, you got this. Just make sure, feel free to trim off any excess fondant that you have at the bottom of the skirt, because it's going to be extra weight and more material you're going to have to work with. It's going to make it easier if you trim some more off. When I got towards the bottom and smoothed down as much as I could on the spinny thing, it got a little harder, so I popped the cake on top of the Crisco can to make it easier to smooth down the bottom part with the fondant smoother. I wasn't too worried about trimming the ends just yet, since I wanted to smooth out the cake with the fondant smoothers. Look at me like a pro using 2 fondant smoothers. Okay then, girl, I see you. Ow. It's so much easier to go around the cake and trim the excess fondant with scissors. Then that way I just smooth the fondant into the styrofoam cake at the bottom, and then we're all set. Yeah, and then just keep smoothing until you get that perfect look that you want. And towards the end, I'm just going to press in with my fingers the fondant into the styrofoam cake. Later on, once it's dry, I'm not going to show you in the video, but after it's dry, you can take a little bit of sandpaper or whatever, flip the cake over and sand a little bit of the bottom off so it sits nicely and perfectly on top of the other layers of cake. Not too bad, not too bad. I don't know if I should keep it and keep looking at it or what. These are all the tiers for my cake. I was so proud. I tried to practice decorating the cakes with the molds that I had, but it didn't turn out as I had hoped for. Alright, it only took this entire whole mess for me to make this beautiful cake. It actually turned out really nice. I was just playing around with the borders and seeing what the shapes would come out like. But they look really nice. This is my favorite one, but it's like the hardest one to do. It's so pretty. I was hoping I could do like an M, but yo, this came out nice. And these are all the materials that I bought for decorating. I didn't know what I needed until I actually bought it, and so I went all out because I said to myself, I'm gonna make this a business afterwards. I'm gonna resell cakes and it's gonna be amazing. But honestly, like, two things to remember: just buy what you need and make sure that whatever you buy, especially the molds, are specifically made for fondant, because the teeny tiny decor that I had was not made for fondant molds. It wasn't made for fondant. So what happened was that I'm trying to like slowly push out the fondant, but it's sticking into the tiny crevices. So you need to find something that's made specifically for fondant. So everything that I'm showing here is what I got from either Walmart or Amazon, but I listed all the links below. And there you have it, your gorgeous wedding cake. Yes, it's time consuming, but you have saved so much money on a wedding cake. Emphasis on a 5-tier wedding cake. But of course, I waited till the last minute to work on actually decorating the cake, so hence the lack of decor. My wedding was December 4th, and these videos were from like late October, and I didn't get to finish the last few cake rounds until late November, I think. These cakes were my practice cakes, and I had every intention of redoing the ones that needed to be redone. I just didn't have time. And the best part was that I forgot to buy a real cake for the cake cutting. So the morning of my wedding, I ran to Stop and Shop and bought the smallest cake I could find that was covered in hard sugar confetti. I tried to scrape it off at the venue and I rolled some fondant on top. The shape was questionable, yes, but again, had to work with what I had. All the 5 tiers couldn't fit on the cake swing, which made me super sad because that bottom tier was so big and so hard to make, but it was what it was. Would I do it all over again? Yes. In a heartbeat, yes I would. If you're wondering what the guests ate at the wedding, we had real pre-cut slices of cake in the back that were served, so no, they didn't eat styrofoam. To preserve your dummy fondant cake, wrap it in plastic wrap or place it in an airtight plastic bag to keep the dust and debris away. Store it in a cool, dry place. If you need to transport it, place it in a sturdy box to avoid any damage. And if it's stored properly, this cake can last years and can be reused and resold and still smell like real fondant, which is crazy. These are the pics I used to resell my wedding cake on Facebook Marketplace. I think I ended up selling it super cheap for like 120 bucks and just redid the top layer for the client since it was stained from the confetti. You made it this far, dolls. If you love this tutorial and want to see more DIYs, go ahead and click the subscribe button to join the doll collection and keep the party going. My channel also helps pay for my son's daycare, so that would be a huge help. See you in my next video.